Hello everyone, this is Sartaj Anand, the founder of EgoMonk, and welcome to Business Beyond 2030, the show where we explore the socio-economic and technological revolutions shaping our world, and the role of business in realizing the future. Business has the transformative ability to move all of us from today to tomorrow with a shared purpose. And I have the privilege to unpack complexity with the world's smartest and most compassionate business leaders and decision makers as they deliver on their promise of abundance. In today's episode, we welcome Sébastien Hug to our studio. Sébastien is the CEO of Swissnex India and the Consul General of the Swiss Consulate in Bangalore since November 2017. He is married and a proud father of 2 daughters. In his professional avatar, Sébastien is constantly connecting the dots between Switzerland and India, especially in education, research, and innovation. He cares deeply about improving the state of the world and brings radical candor to each and every conversation. Thanks, Sébastien, for joining us. Appreciate you taking out the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we'll just go through a few questions. We'll see what you think, and hopefully we'll make sense of the world together.
Okay, thank you.
So Switzerland has long been recognized as a global leader in innovation and competitiveness. What's the secret behind this?
Sure. So maybe I should start to say that actually it's not always been like that. So Switzerland being a leader in innovation, it's really only the last maybe 10, 15 or so years that people recognize that. Back in the days, like early 20th century, actually, we were more seen as a country of peasants and a rural country. So that has really changed. And so even 25 years ago, Switzerland was sort of associated with cheese and chocolate and banks and all these kind of things. So that's also why Swissnex actually was founded to kind of change that image a little bit. And so with the current rankings, of course, being on top on all those different innovation rankings, of course, it helps to change that image. And so my boss, actually, or former boss, I should say, State Secretary Mauro D'Ambrogio, he was always asked this exact same question: what's the secret sauce behind Switzerland's innovation success? And he would say the success is because exactly we don't actually have an innovation strategy. And so people are always a little bit perplexed because okay, what's the strategy? Tell me. And so actually he says we have no strategy. And of course he said that a bit provocatively, but I think what he wants to say actually with that is that as a government we don't have the answer to all the questions when it comes to innovation, but the role of government in Switzerland is going to set the right framework conditions.
So control the regulation.
Regulation is one thing, exactly. So bring clarity, bring some security, but then even investment in education. So the kind of funding you provide to Swiss universities to even basic education. I mean, that is absolutely key. Having an education system that is sort of gives mobility and provides opportunities to all youth in Switzerland. Universities are relatively cheap, actually. Yeah. So quite accessible as well. But then even things like being internationally open is an important sort of factor for companies that come to Switzerland and set up their offices. And then of course like infrastructure, like trains, etc. If you take the train, in fact, from Zurich to Geneva, it probably takes you as long from the airport here in Bangalore to Electronic City. Yeah. So having this kind of infrastructure also brings Switzerland as a innovation ecosystem much closer.
Yeah, you remove the friction.
Exactly.
You allow larger ecosystems to coalesce, more efficiencies come into the picture.
Absolutely. More mobility, more exchange, and that is absolutely key to innovation ecosystem, right? And last but not least, also like a political stability and sort of, so it's not, Swiss politics are not very exciting, but at least it provides for some stability.
Yeah, and for folks who don't know, it is a direct democracy in Switzerland. Yeah. So that, I'm guessing that changes how people can actually influence the system?
Absolutely. So it's a very participative political culture, not just on a national level, but even on a municipal level, actually. So people really, or mostly feel part that they're part of this political process. And then if they find enough people who share the same opinion, that they can change something if they want.
I think capitalism is rooted in this model that government should set the playground, so to say, and then step back and allow the market to occur on its own. That sounds like kind of what's happening there, but obviously strong institutional frameworks of law, justice, IP need to exist. And I think those exist in Switzerland to a large extent.
Absolutely. I think very strong institutions, letting the businesses, startups do what they do best, leave the scientists do what they do best, like let them choose what they want to research on. So provide that autonomy. At the same time, so it is if you want a liberal economy, but with a sort of a social network, right? Safety network. If someone is unemployed, you would get unemployment money, of course. So there's a certain security there as well. And so I personally think it's a quite good balance.
So obviously, like the way you've fleshed it out in terms of the Swiss landscape, it's quite different from what we have here in India.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think India can learn from Switzerland to ramp up sort of innovation per capita? We have so much human talent. It's the scale is amazing, and most people are fascinated by that. But how do we, on a per capita basis, sort of improve ourselves? What do you think we can learn?
So I always find this question very difficult because, as you said, Switzerland and India are the almost very opposites of what you can compare, right? The Switzerland being a very small country, 8 million people, so less people than Bangalore, right? So it's always very difficult. And also coming like if you look, I studied history, so I'm a historian by training. If you look at the historical context, like a very different journey than India or other countries for that matter. For example, we have no natural resources. So we were forced actually to be innovative, right? We are in the midst of Europe, surrounded by huge powers.
Yeah.
So we had to be open. We had to be sort of neutral to survive, if you want. And nowadays, labor is extremely expensive in Switzerland. So the only way we actually can differentiate ourselves is by being innovative. Right? So all these kind of factors contribute to us being innovative. So that is why I find it difficult to compare. That being said, I think what applies to Switzerland is this sort of open approach and liberal framework conditions would also help India. And I think actually India has gone quite a bit of a journey since the 1990s actually in opening up, in investing into research and education, in making India more competitive, opening it up for other companies. And so I think in that way, India is on the right track. Personally, I believe has made a huge journey already, and so I think more of that actually would go in the right direction.
Yeah, we have a lot of sort of evidence-based policy sort of frameworks also coming into India. There's Niti Aayog, there's EPIC in Delhi. So there are these frameworks emerging. And I think we are at that transition point where we want to also punch above our weight because we also have similar challenges. Labor cost will make us non-competitive in a few decades or so, which is already happening in China.
So something that I was really impressed, so it's been now a bit over 1.5 years that I'm in India, is like, the youth here is so aspiring. Like they're extremely ambitious. And that, gives a lot of, I wouldn't say hope, but is really motivating to see actually what's happening here. And is at the foundation of India's change, actually.
Yeah, the social and economic mobility is the promise of this new generation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just moving on, at Egomonk, we're building bridges to a better future life and planet. And Swissnex was similarly conceived to connect the dots between Switzerland and other emerging ecosystems. What's been your approach to immersing yourself personally and the organization into this complex ecosystem?
Yes. So I think, the first thing is to, of course, you can read books about India. And I did read some books when I was back in Switzerland, but until you're actually here sitting in the traffic of Bangalore, but then going to those events and kind of seeing what kind of environment this ecosystem is building up. I mean, that is absolutely key. So going out to events, speaking to people, having one-on-one meetings, speaking to my house helpers at home, speaking to the entrepreneurs, speaking to an artist. So a whole range of different people getting those different impressions on India. And then, of course, I was reading books. So one book I really like is by Nandan Nilekani's Imagining India.
Yeah.
So that is an amazing book. And I
it's
bought
quite
some.
Transformative.
Yeah. It's been, I think, 10 years now.
Yeah.
But sort of the approach he takes explains where India comes from. Helps me to understand so much, actually. And I actually bought a few editions and brought them back to Switzerland to my partners. So in terms of like immersing the organization here in India, I think it's been the other way around. So I think the organization, some of my colleagues have been here for 6, 7, 8 years, and they were helping me to immerse, to understand the Indian context. So I think they helped me in the immersion. I think where I come in is sort of also helping them to understand how maybe Swiss people think, even though they have been now interacting for a couple of years, but trying maybe how administration, government works. That's where I worked before, and then bringing my own network of Swiss people here. So I think in that way I could help sort of merging those different cultures together.
This sort of lends well to my next question, which is, I really believe there are many Indias living in India. When you look at Uttar Pradesh, for example, it has the development metrics of Africa because it's quite different from the south. So as a foreign leader,
as you engage with different stakeholders, how do you come to terms with these cultural nuances at play? How do you make sense of what's right and what's emerging in different parts of India?
So I feel, as I said, 1.5 years here, and I think I would need another 20 years to really discover all of India and understand all these cultural nuances. So I think back in Europe, you look at India as a country. Being here, you understand that it's of course a country, but also a subcontinent. Actually, it's so huge. So I mean, I've been living now in 5 different countries. So I think for each country, it's true that you can't generalize, that each country has its own differences, regional differences, cultural differences, and that is even more so true for India. I mean, of course, I'll travel to different places. So I've been to Rajasthan, I've been to Lucknow, I've been to Kerala, and all these places.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I haven't had really the time to go really out there, let's say in rural areas, for example. So I've usually stayed in the cities and it's for business. So I think that is still something I still need to discover even more. We do tell people that there's more than Mumbai and Delhi and Bangalore in India. So we do bring them to other places. Let's say Hyderabad or Pune are quite well known, of course, here in India. Maybe not that well known back in Switzerland. So we also take them out of those centers and help them to discover India. But again, I think it needs still many more trips for me to really see all the cultural differences.
Yeah, I think just acknowledging where we come from is a big step to learning about India, particularly because it's so different.
No.
I think also because people have come from, it's still just one generation into a liberalized economy. So we're all trying to really climb this economic and socio-economic ladder. Have you seen this in developing partnerships or engaging with stakeholders? Like, how do you approach building these win-win partnership situations? Because the conventional logic is a zero-sum model, right? I win, you lose.
So Swissnex is, of course, a very much partnership-driven organization. So partnership for us means really that both sides, both partners have to have a stake in whatever they do, that they both bring something to the table. So I think we don't look at India as a developing country. Of course, in some parts it is still, but we also want the Indian part to bring something to the table and show some that he or she has an interest in collaborating with Swiss partners, and the same for Swiss partners who come here to India. So before they come here, we have Skype discussions. We're trying to understand where they're coming from, what they're trying to achieve. See, that's not just a trip to India to kind of see and have a chat, have a meeting, but it's really we're trying to curate a conversation, and so managing expectations on both sides is really important. Making sure that their objectives are aligned, making sure that maybe also the culture, organizational cultures are aligned.
Yeah.
So having those discussions on both sides, and then when they come together, sort of help them to understand each other and see where they come from, and then almost more importantly, after they've met, keep the conversation going. So I think, sometimes when we see delegations, people coming here, they are...
it's a high energy.
They're enthusiastic about India. They say, we have to do so much. And then they go back and then they're back in their daily lives.
Yeah.
And so sort of keeping that momentum going is absolutely crucial for partnership. And I think that's also where Swissnex sort of steps in, because that's, we want partnerships to happen. And that's why we play this mediator role.
I love that you mentioned that it's important for both sides to have skin in the game. I think that really automatically as a force sort of aligns you or forces you to align, because in India we have this traditional framework of foreign funding or development funding, and that skewed the power dynamic, that skewed the relationship of sorts, where they mostly perceive external organizations, particularly international organizations, to be a funder, and that's primarily it. And I know you don't think that same way.
No, I mean, and we see that sometimes the reactions we get. Also, like recently we brought some journalists to Switzerland, so paid most of it, but there were some things we didn't pay. And to sort of make them understand that we think it's also must be in their interest to, tell their readership about Switzerland. Only then actually the product will be really good. Was tough. So,
yeah.
But it's a process, it's a conversation. And then people usually understand.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, they also usually have the means to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that is then when you look at it as an equal partnership, that's when partnerships are more successful. In the moment where we tell our Swiss partners come here and teach the Indians to do this or that is not going to work. Neither for the Indians nor for the Swiss in the long term.
So Sebastian, let's talk about crypto, which is always in the news cycle for one reason or the other. Switzerland has historically been a financial giant, and it's already leading in digital currencies with the Crypto Valley at Zug. What do you think is the potential for cryptocurrencies, particularly for emerging markets like India?
Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't call myself a cryptocurrency expert, but when you read the different articles, I think some people say there's a lot of potential, and some other people think that there's really not much potential. I think with any new technology out there, whether it's crypto or any other one, but especially for crypto, I guess there are risks and the opportunities, and so it depends on how you look at the balance of those two things. And so why has Switzerland taken a sort of more progressive liberal approach to cryptocurrency? So as you said, there's a long history of financial institutions. But at the same time, 10 years ago, 2009, we had a financial crisis. And that really sort of shocked also the Swiss financial center. The Swiss bank secrecy as we knew it before no longer exists. So nowadays, basically, it's almost the same like investing your money in Germany or any other country. And so that really made people in the finance sector in Switzerland think, okay, how can we differentiate ourselves? Where can we be innovative in the finance sector? And that's really, when crypto came, people saw in it an opportunity to stay ahead of the game when it comes to finance. So having this crisis actually was a good thing in a way, because it opened their mind for being innovative, for being open for such technologies. And then the Swiss government's approach to sort of set the framework, as I explained in the beginning. So there's no ban of cryptocurrency. At the same time, they say, well, if you want to have trust in cryptocurrency, there has to be a strong enforcement also of regulations, so to avoid fraud. Just maybe, we have to look at that to understand where India comes from. So India, I think, comes from a very different place than Switzerland in that respect. And so I think there are two sort of narratives all over. So there's one, the narrative of the socialist past of India with a strong government, I would say rather interventionist, that wants to combat corruption and fraud. And so when they want to ban cryptocurrency, it comes from a good place because they want to protect the consumer. But there's also this other narrative, actually. So when you read this book by Nana Nilekani, he explained in the 1980s, actually, computers were seen as something very negative as well. So, and now here we are, 20, 25 years later, and actually it's a backbone of the Indian service industry. So, what's the potential for India? We have to see where it's going. I think there's a lot of potential, especially blockchain. I think in the short term, this proposed ban on cryptocurrency will not be too negative, I think. I mean, we've seen other countries, China and others. I think in the long term, I think cryptocurrency is here to stay. And so in the long term, if you ban something, any ban, I think in the past, has those opportunity costs. And the longer you wait, the higher those costs will be. And so in that sense, I hope, of course, that approach to cryptocurrency will evolve. But at the same time, I think there's an understanding why it has been banned.
So I completely agree with you. I think India comes from a slightly protectionist policy framework because it is looking out for the consumer. Because whenever sensationalism in economic markets plays out, it ends poorly and the guy on the street gets hurt. So I understand where it's coming from. What I appreciated was when Switzerland, for example, took this direction of being liberal because it's thinking about what the future is and is trying to control its locus of control. It's trying to stay relevant in a digital economy, so to say. I think we have those opportunities, we have those challenges. And that's why for me, it's very interesting how you think about this Zug model, right? Could you talk a little bit more about that and how probably maybe it came together or what happens actually at Zug that makes it such the crypto valley? So
just about 6 weeks ago, I went with the Indian delegation to Switzerland to study blockchain and the blockchain ecosystem. And as part of that, of course, we also went to Zug. So for those who don't know Zug, Quite frankly, until recently, there was not much happening there. So companies went there because like the tax were really low. So it was a bit of a sleeping town, 25 minutes away from Zurich. So what happened actually a couple of years was that Ethereum was looking for a place to develop their platform. And somehow they found Zug. They had discussions with the local authorities. And the local authorities, they were quite open actually in terms of regulation, in terms of like accommodating them, taxes, etc. And so that actually made them to rent an Airbnb in the city of Zug. So having Ethereum there sort of then attracted other people, and a small ecosystem sort of started building up before this whole crypto thing was a hype, right?
Yeah.
And I think what really helped were like the local authorities, so like the municipality and the canton, so the state of Zug, really supporting that as far as they could within what the law allowed. And then once you have some key people there, they will attract more people, right?
Yeah.
And so nowadays, actually, when you walk through Zug, you wouldn't see much of this crypto hype. So Zug looks still like it looked 15 years ago. And in fact, because it's so close to Zurich, I would, say there's a crypto valley from Zug to Zurich.
Yeah, kind of like the Bay Area.
Exactly. Like
it
the Bay
engulfs
Area.
Everything.
But now even including, I think, Geneva will actually become more and more important now with Libra having their seat and or office in Geneva. So there, I think, might be another sort of ecosystem sort of mushrooming.
Yeah.
And so that's what I said in the beginning. So Switzerland being really small, having good infrastructure, so people being really mobile in a very easy way, really helped sort of building also that ecosystem. And then having the financial center, of course, in Zurich, sort of you had quite a few stories of bankers that did their career in UBS and Credit Suisse, then exited and started their crypto venture or something like that. So you have the talent there. So I'm not sure there's a Zug model, but again, I think it was about favoring framework conditions. It was about an ecosystem, people coming together. Maybe it was a little bit of luck, of course, to an extent. And then a government and authorities that actually were quite open to support that.
There's a similar origin story for Bangalore also, because it started out with outsourcing, offshoring, and then it got into this sort of ecosystem that attracted technologists. Exactly. And then it grew from there because they served out their careers. They wanted to get into startups, and that's how it happened here as well. The reason why this is interesting is because regulators often look at what happens organically and then try to clone it or create conditions to scale it up. Like, for example, Bahrain has a sandbox where they're trying to provide an open regulatory environment so that if you're a crypto startup, if you're a blockchain startup, you can work with their federal bank, their reserve bank to pilot it out. So this is the interesting part, that governments look at models that happen organically and then try to scale those up or replicate those because they're looking at somehow transferring that economic mobility that maybe happened out of the right circumstances coming together and being more actionable around it. So we'll see how this plays out though.
Yeah. So we're working on a few follow-ups actually on this tour. So we see especially the state of Telangana being really progressive and really pushing for blockchain on different levels, blockchain in universities and education, blockchain district and ecosystem. So we hope that there will be some outcomes of that, and so we're planning maybe doing some sort of like an Indo-Swiss blockchain research forum here. So I think it's a big topic.
Yeah, great. I'm glad you're working towards that.
Yeah, I hope we can do something together.
So 2030 is going to come in probably sooner than we think. So as you think about the cross-border collaboration opportunities between Switzerland and India, what sticks out? What do you think is that you're working towards for the next few years? Where are the big, the blue ocean opportunities?
Yes. So we have actually defined last year 4 focus areas. And if I look at them, I think they, one way or another, maybe with different names, but still will be true or relevant in 10 years. So one is health tech. So the entire digital health there, I think, is huge. And in fact, right now there's a global digital health partnership, which I think India is presiding, and so Switzerland just became part of that as well. So I think through different forms, I'm encouraging collaboration in digital health between Switzerland and India. I think will be a big focus for the next couple of years, and will be even more important in 10 years. Let's say AI in health, like diagnostics, imaging, etc. And another area is renewable energy. So India's thirst for renewable energy is huge. And with that comes thirst for new technologies. And I think that's where Switzerland, actually being a very small country, in order for our industry to survive, they have to look outside. And so India seems like a natural partner in that sense. So we look at that. I think we just had recently e-mobility delegations. So e-mobility will be, or the mobility sector in general will see huge disruption in the next 5-10 years. So I think there's that. Something that we haven't started working on yet much, but I think that is quite promising, is the space industry. I think a few days ago what India can do.
Yeah.
And it's not quite yet on the radar, I think, of Swiss stakeholders. So I think they would like to do more. And I think India will be even more powerful in that area in 10 years. So I think that will be definitely an area for further collaboration.
Completely agree with you. Especially mobility and renewable energy. We need those to scale up our vision of what we want to be as a nation. So a few years ago, the World Economic Forum, based out of Geneva, sort of spoke a lot about fourth industrial revolution technologies and the impact it was having on global economies. From an Indian context, what sectors do you think are most ripe for disruption with fourth industrial revolution technologies?
Again, I think it's in the mobility sector, automotive sector. I think that is going to see a huge shift. I think anything to do with manufacturing. So we see that the manufacturing companies, Swiss ones in Pune, for example, we recently organized a workshop on AI, and so how AI can help making their processes and products more efficient. I think that is definitely another one. Even the life science sector, I think, will see huge disruption actually also with 4.0.
Yeah, everyone's talking about personalized medicine, right? How do we go at a genetic level to treat everyone? So
there's that, and there's also like the cost factor, right? So one thing. So I think the debate here in India is mostly having access to healthcare. In Switzerland, the debate is more about the cost of healthcare. So we spend around 12% of our GDP on healthcare. I think in comparison, India is about 1%. If I did my research
1
correctly.
to 2%, yeah.
So I think that's maybe also where Switzerland can learn something from India in the sense of developing new methods and new products that bring down healthcare costs through AI in diagnostics maybe, or even in treatment, or when we look at the preventive healthcare, I think huge topic also in Switzerland. So maybe there we can sort of meet in the middle and look at 6 or 7%.
Yeah, I frugal innovation is just our backbone in terms of how we've approached solving problems, and I do think deep tech, med tech, including that, is a good opportunity for us to export actually to the world, because rising healthcare costs is a global concern.
It's a global concern, absolutely. Yeah.
A few years ago, we saw that the Swiss were going through massive sort of transformative automation as well, and there was this proposal or referendum on universal basic income. What's your take on it?
So I mean, that's related to this whole discussion of automation, right? Something that not only concerns Switzerland, but most other countries, actually.
Yes.
And so there have been studies in Switzerland that looked at that topic. And so some studies came to the conclusion that in theory, in principle, about 50% of all jobs in Switzerland could be automized in one way or another. In reality, of course, it turns out quite differently. I think when we look at this debate, there's a lot of fear, but then I think, and again, some studies looked at, okay, so we will be losing some jobs. At the same time, automation will create a lot of jobs. And so far in Switzerland, actually, it has been positive, the experience. Of course, then there these experiments with the universal basic income. So we had a vote on that, I think 2 years ago, which was rejected by 2/3 of the Swiss population. There are different experiments going on, I think also in Finland, I think in Canada as well. And I just read actually yesterday that those pilot projects sort of stopped or failed in some way. So I think there was a bit of a hype maybe 2 years ago. Nonetheless, it's a good thing to think about different models, but maybe the universal basic income model is at this stage probably too radical. But it's good to have this debate. It helps us to think differently. It helps us to think about the consequences. And I think that the conclusion of that was it comes back to education again. So how can we adapt to these kind of changes, and in fact, rather use automation to enhance what the human being is doing, rather than look at it as a either or. So
upskilling is a big component of this sort of universal basic income debate, where everyone gets a monthly paycheck. The reason why we sort of found it very interesting was that we don't have a social net in India. We don't have the same sort of security mechanisms for social welfare that exist in other economies. For us, this is very interesting because it sort of takes away the risk. It de-risks you that your livelihood is not necessarily connected to your employment status. And that itself, at a thought level, is transformative.
It is, but personally, I'm not sure. I'm not very convinced that it's going to work. I mean, I think what the study showed was that people were, more happy actually. Of course, when you get like $2,000, US dollars, free money
doesn't hurt.
Who won't be happy? But going to work actually is still, it's more than just earning money. It's about being integrated in an organization, being productive, and seeing some value in that.
Yeah.
So we have to see where this debate takes us.
Yeah, completely agree with you. All the studies show that it doesn't work for generating differential employment or additional employment. I think the opportunity here is more, for example, to look at probably qualified basic income, maybe making it available only to the most marginalized.
Yeah, of course.
Maybe that's a direction. But the fact that we're having this debate or having this conversation matters, because more people need to talk about the future of social welfare. And that's missing, I think, in India at least.
No, and having a debate and discussion on what is the future of society, basically, right? Of how do we live together, and what is the role of government in all of that. Another revolution we're going through actually is absolutely crucial. And in fact, I think when we speak about new technologies, and I think we very often forget talking to the social scientists or to the those who study humanities. I think that has to come, like ethics in AI or in blockchain or others. It's a big topic. I think that should be even more highlighted in the future.
And Europe is taking the lead in that, because I know Munich, Facebook has just started a center on ethics in artificial intelligence. I know there are many research projects happening in Switzerland as well, focused on eliminating biases in algorithms. So this is a big topic for the future. Just going a bit inward and looking more closely at Swissnex, the organization. You're a leader. Leaders are often charged with this responsibility to help others realize the best version of themselves. How do you support your team at Swissnex?
Right. So maybe I should give some background on Swissnex. So Swissnex is an organization whose mission is to connect the dots, as we say, in education, research, and innovation between, so in our case, India and Switzerland. We have a very much bit of a startup-y culture, I think. That's sort of the part of our DNA, a very young team. At the same time, here in Bangalore in particular, we also Consulate. Two very different organizational cultures, actually, that you bring together. And so one, you have sort of, again, like startup-y and very sort of, opportunity-driven, and you like to take risks, and you're allowed to make mistakes. And then the Consulate, which traditionally, even though that is also changing now a little bit, but traditionally as a government representation is more risk-averse and maybe more traditional than Swissnex. So bring that together actually was one of the challenges. That being said, I think we did a pretty good job. But you said, how can I help build the culture? So I think as a leader, you can do only so much. So you can be sort of a role model, of course. But at the end of the day, it is up to the team to build that culture, each individual. So I think, giving them responsibility, making sure that they understand that it is their role, their responsibility to, have a work culture which fits them, is part of what, I think is my role is. And so I can influence, of course. And it's a bit like I see myself a bit like a gardener. Right, so you have different if you want plants and flowers, and everyone has its own beauty, and you have to support them grow in different ways, and sometimes you have to rearrange them. So it's a constant process. Sometimes flowers need more space to grow, or you have to take them somewhere else because they want to be in a different garden. So. And sometimes you have no sun, so you have to be patient as well, right? So the up and downs in any organization. So in that way, I think sort of bringing some clarity, giving people the freedom, being a role model, giving them the responsibility to build the culture they want, I think is part of my job. And having constant conversations with them on these kind of topics.
Yeah, a complaint I hear often from most sort of employees in India is micromanagement. I think this space itself is such a huge deal because it communicates to your employees or your team members that we believe in you. We trust that you know what you're doing, and we'll give you the space and the room to deliver it on your own. So I think that's great.
Having this autonomy, I think, is absolutely crucial. I think that is where I came from, and I think that's where I was very fortunate in my own career, that I always had supervisors that gave me that autonomy, that freedom also to make mistakes. And then, so I think if you had this training in your own career, it helps you also maybe then to convey that to your team.
Some of the sectors and bodies that you interact with are think tanks, universities, government agencies. They're quite diverse. And typically these sort of large monolithic organizations are slow moving. How do you sort of build momentum or inspire urgency in these sort of stakeholders?
I think the first thing, I'm not sure always government is much sort of slow moving than, let's say, larger corporations. I think if you look at as soon as the organization is large and has several thousands of people, automatically processes are a bit slower. So when you look at large corporates, I think sometimes also they're quite slow, even compared to maybe some government agencies. So I think it's a matter also of a government organization size. So how do you bring this urgency? I have a background in political sciences, and there's this one framework which says it needs two things for change to happen. One is a sense of urgency, as you said, but that alone very often is not enough. In order to have real change, actually, there has to be an underlying shift in beliefs. And I think at Swissnex, with regards to sort of being Indo-Swiss collaborations grow, I think we're still in that phase where we're trying to push for that shift of belief. So sort of changing the image of India in Switzerland, trying to explain to our Swiss stakeholders what India is all about. Sometimes I have a bit the feeling that, especially when you read the newspapers, it's very often the negative stuff that comes through. So it's a very one-sided image that comes through in Europe. And so showing to our Swiss stakeholders the different side of India, I think, is part of our role. So then, helping to create the shift in the belief system, and then creating urgency in a sense that we say, okay, well, in 3 months we have this platform coming up. It is now or never. Please come, and a great opportunity to meet and learn about India. Of course, we also create a sense of urgency by saying, look at the Netherlands, for example. So they're coming later this year with a huge delegation. Look at what the French are doing. Very impressive in the space area. So of course we tell these kind of things to our Swiss partners, and they will act to it if they believe really that there is some opportunity for them out there in India. So it's sort of a continuous engagement process, explaining, staying in touch, changing their belief system, and then creating opportunities for them to come and create this sense of urgency.
And when you look at these relationships, how much time do you sort of invest in them? Is it a multi-year relationship? What's your approach to this? Because oftentimes, yes, startups run out of capital, other folks run out of patience. What are your expectations when working with these sort of stakeholders so that you're in sync?
Absolutely. And I think it is a multi-year process. So we are just now, next year we'll be celebrating 10 years of Swissnex. So we're now in the process of looking back, actually, what has been happening. And you see it takes several years for partnerships to grow, to blossom. And so one of the sort of key aspects of what you're trying to do is, we call it continuous engagement. So, or basically having a systematic key account management with startups. So we call them up on a regular basis. We meet them on a regular basis every time we go to Switzerland. Give them updates, over Skype, in meetings, etc. So there, I think I'm also very fortunate because I have a team and team members who have been there for 5, 6, 7 years. So they were able to really build a very strong relationship with our key partners in Switzerland. And in that sense, I think it's quite easy, and people, trust us a lot. And building up this trust actually is absolutely key in our relationship management.
As we sort of wind down the interview, I just want to know about privacy and how you make sense of it. So the Swiss have always been known for, to some degree, the bank secrecy, but also Europe in general is very pro-privacy. Mm-hmm. We're living in this era of attention economy, and everyone claims data to be the new oil. How do you make sense of this dichotomy between privacy and public utility? Data for good, data for intelligence. Is there some sort of feasible middle path that you think we can do?
So I'm not sure there's one middle path. Just recently, actually, we had an event on cyber ethics, and we came to the conclusion that different cultures have very different understandings of what's a good middle path, actually, what's a good balance. And again, like being a historian, if you look at the history of a country, I think that plays a huge role. So are you a country that has a history of tensions, of maybe even terrorism, or do you have a history of rather peaceful living together? So then your understanding will change as to how much privacy you have to give up in order to ensure that there's a public safety out there. So I think again, I think each country has to sort of answer that for themselves. At the same time, these discussions I think take a lot of time and should be more highlighted nowadays. We are today celebrating 70 years of the Geneva Convention on Humanitarian Aid. And I think there are many people in Switzerland who believe that something similar for digital governance, for cyber ethics would be needed. So having a framework of principles where actually all the different countries come together and agree that this is how we should look at the balance of privacy, right? And privacy and public utility. And so we're working on that, on making that happen. And hopefully then at some point there will be a conference, maybe in Geneva, maybe in Switzerland or somewhere else, but stakeholders coming together and agreeing on some principles of how this digital governance should look like. And what proper ethics when we think about these kind of questions.
Yeah, there are many nations out there who just talk about blanket regulations to keep tech in control, but I think we do need this active cross-border collaborative attitude when it comes to governing data exchange and data localization and technology in general. The Swiss have been great at being that, the convening power for this sort of movement in the past, and perhaps they'll take that mantle on in the future as well.
I hope so very much. I think we're working on it at least.
Great. Thanks again, Sébastien, for joining us on the show today. What was your experience like?
It was a great conversation. Thanks so much for having me. I think that was a pleasure.
EgoMonk is an impact publisher, bringing organizations closer to the communities they want to serve and the leaders they wish to influence. We combine insight, context, and experience to deliver asymmetric outcomes and are driven by our goal to positively impact 1 billion human lives by 2030. If you would like to collaborate with us, then please visit our website, egomonk.com, or send me an email at sartaj@egomonk.com. And if you like this episode, then please do share it with others and consider rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to your podcasts.